CBP operations? Can you provide numbers, either now or for the record, of how many migrants are currently enrolled in each program? And lastly, are you tracking any metrics or seeing any outcomes from these pilot programs that would lead you to consider making changes to these programs, sir?
So the first, sir, so the positive effect, I think the greatest positive effect, as you can see in the last 8 months, we've seen over a 70% reduction in the flow. So the height of May, I think everybody knows, about 144,000. In January, it was around 36,000. I think that is the best indicator that these programs are absolutely working. Numbers, yes, we have those numbers. And again, anybody on this committee, any staff member that wants those numbers, we can give those to you. I have those. The Migrant Protection Protocol, for example, to date, 59,000 individuals have been enrolled in that program. E&V, for example, 17,000 have been enrolled in that program. PACER, a little under 2,500. ACA, about 1,000. And HARP, a little over 1,200. And we can offline get you all those numbers. To lastly, what was the third part?
Are you tracking any metrics or seeing any outcomes from these pilots that would lead you to consider making changes to these programs?
Yes, actually to expand these programs. So these programs, MPP, for example, it was extremely effective, and so we've expanded that program along the southwest border. PACER, again, is a program that has been effective, and so we're trying to expand that program as well as HARP. MPP, for example, I'm sure it may come up in a question. We're trying to expand that to additional demographics, for example, some extracontinental countries, as, for example, Brazil. So I'd say that's what we're seeing, that these programs are effective and they're working, and we need to continue to expand them.
Really appreciate the thoroughness of that answer, and these are very difficult issues, sir. After the hundreds of thousands of people presented themselves last year at our southwest border, it was obvious that we needed to make some changes. I'm pleased with the changes that have been made, and I support the administration's efforts to address these challenges head on, sir. In the time I have remaining in fiscal 19 and 20, we responded to multiple requests from you and, frankly, many members of Congress for more customs officers and agricultural inspectors across our borders and ports of entry. But in your fiscal 21 budget, not only are you asking for more customs officers and ag inspectors, you're actually asking for a reduction in the amount of people across your Office of Field Operations. Do you believe that the current workforce of customs and ag inspectors is more than sufficient to cover your needs and to protect this nation, thus allowing for such a significant reduction? And my other question is, what is the basis for the reduction you've proposed, sir?
So thanks for that question. So there's a little bit of a timing issue with the 20 enacted and the 21. So we're actually not looking for a reduction of CBPOs. What we're hoping to do, and I think some of this will be worked out through technical assistance as we're finishing a 21 budget, is through appropriations and through current user fees. We hope to be able to fund the current plus-up, I believe it was 600 officers that we received. As we're seeing the volume increase in unprecedented levels this past year, obviously the user fees are increasing too. So we think that that's going to be enough to annualize those CBPOs. In addition to that, once again, and I know there's some disagreements on this, but we've asked for legislative proposals to increase other user fees, modest fees, like, for example, the immigration fees. They haven't been increased since 2001. We're asking for a modest $2 increase. That's going to get us a couple $100 million, and we think that will support additional, I think it's around, don't hold me to it, but around 1,400 additional CBPOs. So we're absolutely committed. We need more CBPOs at the ports for all the reasons I think everybody in this committee understands, and we're committed to working towards that.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And Madam Chair, my time's up. I'll yield back.
Mr. Price.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Commissioner, to the committee. I want to ask you about the practice of metering, so-called. CBP has been engaged in the practice of regulating or metering asylum seekers at the ports of entry. That is, not receiving their applications immediately and requiring them to wait on the other side of the border for a limited number of slots that may or may not open up each day or each week. That obviously severely limits the number of individuals who are able to take advantage of what we are supposedly providing them an ability to enter our country and seek asylum. And that, it appears to me that's in direct competition, or at least in tension, with the government's zero tolerance policy, which compels all asylum seekers to come to the ports of entry to claim asylum. That's what we tell them to do. But as a result of metering, you have this huge backlog of asylum seekers denied entry. They haven't been able to even file their claims. They're stuck on the other side of the border. They may feel they have no choice but to attempt to cross over illegally. So I think one could argue, and I want to ask you about the empirical evidence on this, one could argue that metering is prompting illegal immigration. I went to the border last summer, saw firsthand the effect of this policy in Matamoros. We spoke with migrants waiting outside of the bridge, 102-degree heat. Some had waited 3 or 4 months for their names to be called from a list for the few slots available for entry each day. And they know that once they turn themselves in, of course, they'll need to spend time in crowded CBP facilities, holding facilities. But what list, you ask? There's no CBP waiting list. There's no official process that allows migrants to wait in line. That list is run by someone different at every Mexican border town. There's no transparency on how names get on that list, in what order they list. The lists are, where we saw, was taped to the window of the building in Matamoros. It had 2,000 names on it. 2,000 names on it. The migrants told me no name had been called, no slot had been opened up for days. Congress has been increasing funding for your agency for the past several years. A lack of resources doesn't seem to me to be an excuse for this kind of chaos, for a list having 2,000 names on it. So you can see that the questions swirl around this situation. Given the number of asylum seekers seeking or waiting at ports of entry, what has the agency done to improve internal processes and expand resources to handle these larger number of applicants? People do, after all, have a legal right to claim asylum or to ask for asylum in our country. So what's the legal justification for denying them the ability to do so, for metering those pursuing asylum claims? And then what about the practical effects? What are the consequences of metering at the ports of entry for people who may cross then at illegal in places that apart from the ports of entry?
So it's a complicated process, no doubt, sir, and there's multiple things we have to balance. There is a capacity issue. It's very real. I think it goes to a previous question about CBPOs, and we were committed. We agree that we need more CBPOs at all the ports of entry, not only to fulfill our complex, vast role, but to include this as well, because you are right. We want individuals to come legally to the ports of entry. I absolutely agree. That's what we want. And so we do need to improve our capacity. We need to improve our infrastructure, our physical infrastructure, so we have additional capacity to be able to house. We need additional CBPOs so that we can balance our wide and very deep mission. It's a balancing act every single day for the CBPOs at every single port to balance their counterterrorism mission, their counter-narcotics mission, the lawful trade and travel, revenue collection, as well as the immigration issue. That's a tough balance every single day. And so there has to be decisions that are made every single day to balance. And so we don't always have the resources to be able to accept everybody that comes. I would say we don't deny anyone, but there is a process, and we don't have the capacity to accept everyone that comes in immediately.
What are your ideas for improving this? I mean, the capacity is one thing. So the few slots that you open up for people to come and make this legal claim, those slots, I would think, could be much more accessible. You know, there'd be more such slots and facilities and personnel for handling these applications. In the meantime, thousands of people waiting across the border with no sense in many cases of how these lists were put together. Shouldn't CBP at least have an official list so that's transparent, where people know where they stand and how long approximately they may have to wait? I'm not saying that's the permanent solution, but it just seems intolerable for this to be this degree of arbitrariness and a lack of transparency to this system. People in this group we visited with had no idea if they would ever be called, no idea where they stood on this list.
And my understanding is also they're living in deplorable conditions.
Well, the conditions are terrible, but if we could have an answer, I would appreciate it. Yeah.
So again, I would not say it's arbitrary, and I think I'm also committed to making sure, and it goes back, Chairwoman, to your opening comments about sharing information. So I absolutely I'm committed to work with you and your staff and everybody at the committee to get you the information exactly how the process is done, working with you to see how we can improve the process. But again, it does come down to a balancing act every single day, as I described, to balance the vast mission that we have: counterterrorism, counter narcotics, lawful trade and travel. And it does come down to both physical capability of facilities and personnel.
Well, these are asylum seekers who are turning themselves in. This isn't in the first instance a security issue. It's an issue of how do you accommodate these legal applications. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Ms. Granger.
Thank you. I have two questions. And the first one is just for my clarification. Tell me the difference in asylum officers, processing coordinators, and processing agents.
So ma'am, the asylum officers and then processing agent and coordinators, I think the processing, that's the same thing. So the only difference, so asylum officers, again, USCIS has that. They're the ones that conducts all the fear screening. So they own that. The processing agents is a new concept that the Border Patrol has come up with to really get, badges back to the border, and then have special non-law enforcement personnel that are designed to go to the processing centers to help facilitate the processing of families and children. We're going to receive some specialized training in that, but again, non-law enforcement officers to do that.
Thank you. And on this last trip I took, I was very aware of trying to get the Border Patrol agents back to doing what they have been trained to do, and therefore it's good. One of the things I want to ask you about the new fencing that's installed. Can you tell me what effect that's had on the unauthorized crossings and smuggling, on your agents' response times, and generally the workload and staffing in the area where the new fencing is existing?
Thank you for that question. It's showing and it's proving what it has for the 30 years that we've used the multi-layer strategy of infrastructure, technology, and personnel. And I think that's important, that when we talk about the wall, it's not just about the wall. The wall is not the sole answer, but it is an integral part of that multi-layer strategy, infrastructure, technology, and personnel. And where we see the new wall being built, for example, in El Paso, we got about 20 miles built, and we've seen apprehensions and illegal entries and gotaways all being reduced by over 80% in that 20-mile stretch. If you look historically in Yuma and other places where that multi-layer strategy of infrastructure, technology, personnel, we've seen the same stuff. It is absolutely effective. And one of the key is it's about impedance and denial. It's not that it's impenetrable, but it does deny and impede long enough for Border Patrol agents to actually get there to do the apprehension and interdiction. And it works. But I think what we're doing now is very different in the past, that it's not just a wall, it's a wall system. It has the access roads, it has the technology, integrated lighting and cameras. It's a very different methodology, very different system, and it's working.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Commissioner. My first question, you talked in response to the Chairwoman's questions about pulling critical resources, so I wanted to kind of stick with that theme. You meant on the human side, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the financial side with respect to the border wall. As an appropriator, I think all of us share a concern about CBP spending on a physical border wall, especially when the number is not what we have allocated. According to the GAO, CBP's Border Security Improvement Plan doesn't include life cycle cost estimates. between the years 2019 and 2027. As you know, life cycle cost estimates would be how much money is spent on an asset like the wall as long as it can be used. This typically includes from the start of the project through the future repairs. The budget request this year is $2 billion for the physical wall, yet CBP doesn't have life cycle cost estimates available. This is in addition to the $10 billion in construction funds that the President has transferred or reprogrammed from other accounts. And just as a refresher, that's $600 million from Treasury, $2.5 billion from DOD's counter-drug activities, $3.6 billion from military construction projects, and $3.8 billion appropriated for ships, fighter jets, and drones. This is a pattern of requesting more money for the border wall and diverting funds from other accounts, all with the promise that this barrier would make our country safe. But as we've seen, drugs can be smuggled over ladders, using drones, and through tunnels. And even with basic power tools. So while the wall can be effective at times at a layer that you've indicated, the true costs of this border wall are not known. Without this life cycle cost estimate, won't it be likely that we're going to have to divert future funds from other accounts to address repairs and inefficiencies that in out years?
So I am familiar with the GAO report, and that was based on the FY17 BSEP. We have a new FY19 BSEP that's been completed. It's actually in the process of review. We're hoping to have that review completed and provided to everybody.
And that has life cycle cost estimates?
So that I don't know. I'll have to get back and get you that information. I'm not specifically sure about that element of the BSEP. So I'll get back to you on that, though. But with cost, again, what I would say is when we talk about the wall, I think it's important that it's not in place of or in lieu of other stuff. Just like when we talk about technology, technology should not be utilized in lieu of the wall, just like the wall should not be utilized in lieu of technology. We need it all, including the wall. Again, and you mentioned it too, that multi-layered strategy of the wall, technology, and personnel. It's an integral part of that multi-layered strategy going forward, and so it works. It works, and we have that data. And if we have not provided that data thoroughly, we can provide that data that shows that multi-layered strategy works.
I think many of us would love to see that data. I don't think that your team has been responsive. I don't think you've been responsive enough to give us that data. I don't know what use a 2019 BSEP would be without life cycle cost estimates. If a 2017 BSEP didn't have life cycle cost estimates and the GAO told you that, so I'm a little frustrated about that. I get the multi-layer piece, and I think that that's fine. I think that all of us would love to have that policy discussion, but this is the body, this is the group that decides how we fund those layers. Absolutely. I understand the suggestions that you're making. Well, the administration doesn't understand because we're diverting funds without calculating future out-year costs, and you're doing it as a result of funding that we haven't allocated. And so that's the concern that a lot of us have. But let's stick with the BSEP then. The GAO specifically found that the BSEP, and I could only use the 2017 BSEP, as you mentioned, it doesn't include a methodology to analyze the cost associated by segment and by location. As well, costs associated with the terrain, as my colleague Mr. Cuellar has mentioned in the past, land ownership and terrain. There are cost estimates as well that would have to do with those land costs for private property owners. So without a thorough analysis of deploying these barriers for specific locations, how do we ensure that we're not overspending in key areas?
So, sir, I do think that the BSEP addresses those issues. And again, it should be in its final stages, and we should be able to have that committee. I think the ex-secretary said yesterday he's looking at the June timeframe that we should be able to have that the new updated BSEP ready for your review and approval.
And so that will have by segment and by sector. It will give us different types of technologies that can be used in those areas. It'll include life cycle cost estimates. It'll include these types of things that we're asking. So
the one thing, as I said before, is what I need to go back and get more fidelity on is specifically the life cycle issue. So we'll get that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Morgan, for being here today. We have spent a tremendous amount of time in this body talking about the broad reach of drugs in our community. Whether that is marijuana, cocaine, heroin, or fentanyl, these drugs are decimating communities across this nation. These drugs are literally killing our sons and daughters, and the bulk of these drugs are coming across our borders. We are taking a lot of our agents off the front line to deal with the flood of migrants, and it concerns me that the reduction in manpower on the border may have negative effects on the drug interdiction rate. In fact, I mean, we've witnessed Ranking Member Granger, myself, Fleischman, and Representative Cuellar witnessed a drug seizure at a point of entry of about 7 to 8 kilos of cocaine when we were there last February. So the drug problem is absolutely real. So my question to you, are you concerned about you having to pull your agents out of the field and doing their primary missions to become basically caretakers for the surge of the migrants? And how are you trying to balance the need for apprehension, interdiction, and other things when you have limited resources?
First of all, I appreciate that you recognize it's a difficult balance. And at the height of May of 144,000 in 1 month, we were taking about 40 to 50% of Border Patrol agents, gun toter, frontline agents and officers off the line to do the humanitarian. We knew that the smuggling organizations were on purpose, with intent, using large groups to then divert our resources so they can smuggle drugs in. And we actually have that on video, on surveillance, and that was happening every single day. So it was a significant issue. And so that's why when we talk about the drug issue, which, by the way, is a significant national security threat to this country, 68,000 people last year died to the drug overdoses. And the hard narcotics that I call, they're increasing. Meth so far in fiscal year 20, we've seen around a 50% increase in meth just the first quarter of FY20. So it's absolutely a real problem. And so, but we can't separate the immigration problem, from the drug problem. They're interconnected. And so the higher the immigration numbers are, the more resources that are pulled off to deal with that, the more drugs are pouring in this country. And that's why it's so important when we talk about the holistic threat is by reducing the flow of illegal immigrants coming into this country, I'm able to put more Border Patrol agents and more officers back on the line to do our counterterrorism mission, our counter-drug mission, and all the other stuff that we're responsible for.
So some people have said that the cocaine, the cartels, and the transnational organized crime that's growing the drugs and trying to smuggle it into South or into Central America and Mexico, this is causing the stabilization of the region, which is also causing the surge in migrants leaving their hometown. So the base is, what you said, is probably the cocaine trade and the drugs. I've been an advocate for utilizing the National Guard on the border for over 10 years. I know they've had some very successful missions, but right now I believe we have around 5,000 National Guardsmen, some my fellow Mississippi National Guardsmen serving on our southern border. Can you tell me how they're able to help you do your day-to-day mission?
First of all, I agree. I spent almost 11 years in the United States Marine Corps, so I know the military well, and I tell you, they are providing an absolute tremendous support. Monitoring, detection, surveillance, the list goes on about what they're doing and how they're assisting us. And again, it goes back to their resource. I mean, those are critical roles and jobs that they are providing, so that it allows the gun toters, as I call them, back on the line to go after the drug smugglers, to seize the drugs, to seize the gang members, to seize the criminal aliens coming into this country. They have been invaluable in their support.
Yeah, it's one team, one fight.
One team, one fight, yes, sir.
And I know the National Guard is honored to be a part of that mission. So with that, I yield back.
We're honored to work with them.
Thank you.
The next member, I just also want to point out that we've also been told that as we're tightening up the border, the drug cartels are now using the waterways, and so that we're seeing more coming in through waters, which is going to be, the Coast Guard is going to have to play even a bigger role in what they're doing.
Yes,
so
that's absolutely correct.
Right. Mr. Rupesberger.
Okay, thanks. First thing, I'm impressed with your resume. You're acting commissioner, but it's good to see somebody who has experience and is apolitical. And so I'm looking forward to good things from you in this position. I want to try to get into 3 programs if I can. I can't stay for a second round, and so I'm going to go pretty quick and then if you can't answer it in the time, you can get back to me. First thing is Border Patrol Tactical Unit, BORTAC. Understand the Border Patrol Tactical Unit, or BORTAC, is on loan to ICE for the time being. I recognize the intelligence and tactical capabilities they do bring to the table. I'm trying to get a sense of priorities. Can you tell me what their role will be and who they will be targeting? How does pulling away this unit alter the capabilities of CBP to respond to high-level threats at the border? Will they be conducting operations on their own, or will always be in support of ICE operations? What I'm concerned about with the public image of BORTAC, which is essentially a SWAT team, and the message it can send to residents of cities like Baltimore, which the administration has deemed a sanctuary city. Can you describe how BORTAC will be conducting business beyond our border communities? For example, how many agents can we expect to see in a city like Baltimore? If BORTAC unit is deployed, can you give me your word that it will not have the appearance of an occupying force? That's number one. Secondly is modular surveillance system, FLAIR. Since foot and vehicle crossing points are unpredictable, our agents must be agile. The Modular Mobile Surveillance System Program, or MS-2, is the next generation of CBP's mobile surveillance capability. This program offers our men and women on the front line the ability to adapt to dynamic nature of protecting our border. Mounted on vehicles, this technology becomes the eyes and ears of our agents in the field, and it is a verified force multiplier and an important pillar of your border protection. For this reason, this committee included $15 million in the FY bill to procure these assets. However, I've heard rumors that CBP is considering reshuffling funding from M2S2 to anonymous surveillance towers. While I believe some of these towers are effective technology, it is no substitute for mobile surveillance vehicles, and this move would be sidestepping the intent of Congress. Is CBP currently still planning to follow congressional intent and the President's budget to acquire the funded number of M2S2 systems in the FY20 bill? While the understanding that the funds provided have a long period of availability, how many units do you anticipate rolling out this year, and what is your plan for phasing them into use? And will you commit to ensuring the committee will receive your prior notification as required by law if CBP decides to reprogram these funds? It's important that we move forward, I believe, with that program and not change. Finally, multi-role enforcement aircraft. The President's budget includes no funding for air and marine operation multi-role enforcement aircrafts for the last few cycles. However, Congress has appropriated enough for the reduction of 3 planes. We do this because the members are here and our agents in the field recognize the CBP's aviation assets are a critical component of border security. Furthermore, we know the cost savings associated with economies of scale and a rolling assembly line. My question for you is, if the committee complied with the President's request and did not provide funding for the production of MEAs, how would it impact the future of the program? And in your opinion, are MEAs an integral part of CBP's planned air capabilities moving forward? Do you still intend to procure the amount required by the program of record? If not, what has changed? And are you concerned with how much more it will cost the taxpayer to deliver these assets if the production line dries up due to a lack of continued support? I did it this way. I can't stay for another round, so I want to answer as much as you can in the 5 minutes, and if not, if you can get back.
Yes, sir. So I'll try to go at least top line on all 3 of those, and then I will get back to you. So BORTAC, I think it's important because there's been a lot of misinformation on BORTAC. I want to make very clear to this committee, we are not deploying BORTAC teams. So that's not what's happening.
So they're not coming to the sanctuary cities like Baltimore?
There is no BORTAC element that's being deployed. What happened is we have 100 individuals, 50 officers, 50 agents. They're all volunteers. Some of them just happen to also be BORTAC agents. But there's no BORTAC element. There's not going to be, I saw some reports that we're going to be having these tank-like armored vehicles and the BORTAC agents are coming up as elements all swatted out. That's not happening. It's not happening. There's actually going to be just a handful through multiple cities within the United States. They fall under the auspices of ICE. It's like a task force. We do this every single day. We have agents on FBI, JTTS. We have them on border corruption task forces. Last year we helped ICE with over 70 operations. We're going to look like them, dress like them, and fall under their auspices. So I want to make sure that
that's good to hear at this point, but it's being managed and looked at. Okay.
Yes, sir. So on MS2, so first of all, absolutely agree with everything you said on how important that mobile surveillance technology is. I totally agree. I think it makes it tough in the budget. We have to make trade-offs and a balance. And what we looked at in the autonomous towers, it's an integral need as well. So we went back, to the Border Patrol, and we said, hey, if you have to prioritize right now, what would you prioritize over? And they said, we really need these autonomous towers. And I think that's key because we used to call them innovative towers. We changed that name to autonomous because that's really critically important because they're infused with AI, meaning it's not going to take an operator anymore to run that tower. They're self-sufficient, they're energy sufficient, and they're standalone, and they're also semi-mobile as well going forward. So we are still committed to the mobile surveillance units.
Well, I think you should, because I'm concerned about the reason for the towers, but that's another issue.
And as we work through the transition, we will make sure that we work with the committee to make sure.
No, let's get back. Okay.
Right, exactly. And then the MEA, real quick, I know we're running out of time. Again, 100% agree on the MEA. Again, it was a trade-off. We go back to AMO, and they said, hey, look, we have to prioritize, and there's a couple of things we need to prioritize. One is there's an incredible amount of funding in the FY21 budget to sustain what we already have and upgrade the technology in the aircraft we already have. Some of the technology is old, it's outdated, it's got to be updated, and we need to sustain the aircraft we have. The other thing that really was the tipping point for the priority is they really needed an AMO air facility in Laredo. And so that was really the trade-off for FY21, is that they really wanted this. And so it's going to be the first of its kind, the first time it's been appropriated for an air facility since the inception of CBP. And the last part that I'll make, and I appreciate the committee, because in the 20 budget we asked for 2 ME, but the enacted you gave us another one. So appreciate that. And so that's kind of how that laid out, but we're absolutely committed to the program, and it is integral.
And I appreciate on all these issues you come back to my staff.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back to something that the chairwoman said earlier, because it's one of my main concerns, being from the state of Florida. As we continue to tighten up on our southern border, we are going to see, and we are seeing, as you know, that shift around to the water. And one of my concerns, though, to change just a little bit, is, you mentioned the 29 million cargo containers that are being brought into the country every year. I know our goal was to have 100% screening. Can you tell me where that number is at now on those 29 million? How many are actually being screened for, because to me, that's 29 million Trojan horses that we are inviting into our ports every year. And there are potential seaburn events in every one of them. So what number is actually being checked right now?
So first of all, I agree that that's a vulnerability and that's an issue. What I can tell you in the cargo, we're getting almost 100% of advanced cargo manifest information, and that's key because with that volume, we're not at 100%, we're not even close. But with that advanced cargo manifest information, we're able to apply kind of a network of a layered approach of intelligence-driven operations to then target specific containers. Mm-hmm. And we can offline provide you a whole bunch of information of how we formalize that intelligence and targeting to select certain containers. But right now, we're about 3%.
3? Okay. And I really look forward to speaking with LSS on this because I think there's some technologies out there that I've been made aware of that can really help us enhance that number quite significantly. And this is, having been in law enforcement forever, this is a real concern to me, what's going on in these ports. So.
I agree 100%. LSS is an integral part of that, and we are working through LSS to work with companies out there to continue to advance the technology.
Thank you. And second question on the AMO training facilities. I have one in my district, and I know we're looking at a 50% increase in hires of air and marine operators over the 19 numbers. So are we going to have the throughput at that academy for that? I mean, I know there's some improvements that are being looked at down there. Is that in the 500 million I think that I saw?
It is, and right now the numbers, sir, are showing that we are going to be able to support this for the first time, I think, in about 10 years. Don't hold me to that exact year, that we actually have a net gain in AMO officers and agents. So we're making tremendous strides in improving those processes. So we feel confident we're going to be able to meet that.
Yeah. And they're doing an amazing job on workarounds, and there's some expensive travel that they have to do expensive in time. So good. I'm glad, and I look forward to following up on that. Another concern, and I'll I've still got a little time. The ports in the the number of officers that we have on the ports, sharing them with our, like in Jacksonville, Jacksport is sharing with our airport, and those delays that are being created, that's really an economic hit to our port. Can you talk about any kind of increases for those ports of entry, those marine ports of entry particularly, that are struggling with officers?
Sir, I think that's a great question. I mean, really, all 320 of our ports, we need more resources, and I think that's why, again, we'll continue to work through the technical systems for 21 to make sure through appropriations and increased user fees. To make sure that we're not only annualizing the supplement that you've already given us, the committee appreciate that, but then also really trying to work and show, and I think it is our responsibility to show you why we really think that, like, for example, additional fees should be increased, that
Right.
nominal $2, because we think that that's going to be able to get us, about 3,000 additional CBPOs that we can then put through multiple ports.
Right. And you're looking at 750 this year.
Border
right?
Patrol.
Yeah, Border Patrol. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. With that, Madam Chair,
Ms. Bing?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. I wanted to ask a question about House Report 116-180, which directs Homeland to hire or otherwise obtain services of child welfare professionals at every southern land border, port of entry, and Border Patrol station. Further directed CBP to provide an associated execution plan no later than 60 days after enactment of the fiscal year 2020 spending bill. The deadline passed last week. As you know, screenings and expertise provided by child welfare professionals will help prevent these children's return to harm and needless separation from family members, while avoiding tragic deaths in CBP custody. When I went to visit McAllen, they also mentioned that they did not feel properly equipped and trained to handle so many issues, sensitive issues in regards to children. Have you submitted the child welfare professionals' execution plan yet as directed by Congress?
So I'll have to come back and get some more fidelity exactly where that's at on the process. But I can tell you that, since even 9 months ago, the transition that we've made on all things medical care has really been transformational. I mean, at the height, when we saw this unprecedented crisis of families and children, I think along the southwest border, we had like 20 medical professionals that were available. Fast forward today, we have over 700 that are on contract, and over 300 medical professionals are on duty 24/7, 365, in 45 locations. Since then, we've conducted 65,000 screenings of juveniles. We averaged last year 80 hospital visits a day. Over 20,000 individuals went to the hospital. I could go on with the stats, but hopefully that does show that I think somebody said earlier, when this crisis started, we weren't prepared. We didn't have the resources. But I think that we've showed, and we can give the facts if we haven't, that we have absolutely committed to continue to increase our care for especially children and families.
Yeah, thank you. I just would love to see the plan if you and your team could get back to the committee, and also want to make sure that the medical professionals in contract or the increased number of folks that you are working with, which is great, but I want to make sure it's not at a lesser percentage because of all the additional children that have been separated or harmed thus far. I wanted to ask another question. I've been working with my colleague from New Hampshire, Congresswoman Annie Kuster, the CBP's fiscal year 18 annual report assessing CBP efforts to prevent, detect, and respond to sexual abuse in holding facilities. The report said that there were only 8 allegations of sexual abuse. Later, we saw the Inspector General had received 23 reports of sexual abuse at the holding facilities. Just wanted to see what the reason was for the inaccurate or inconsistent reporting.
So I can't address the inaccuracy reporting, but what for us and from my perspective, Commissioner, it doesn't really matter in the sense of we're taking both reports and we're going to consume both of those reports. But you're right, in the 2018 report there was 8 total, 7 unsubstantiated, 1 was found substantiated that was detainee on detainee. Of course, this all falls under the PREA. So, we're reviewing both reports and looking for areas if we can improve on areas like that. We're going to consume those recommendations and work with them to do just that.
And you're working with the Inspector General as well?
Of course.
Okay. And what actions will you take to ensure that the fiscal year 19 report has accurate data on detainees who experience sexual abuse at holding facilities?
So, what we can do is, we obviously we have multiple entities that provide oversight, and that's tough. We suggest and we do civil rights, civil liberties is another example where we have all these different independent entities that are doing their own audits, which we support. We do try to influence that they work with each other so that we don't have inconsistent reporting. At the bottom line, we really can't control the different independent audits. All I can say is that we fully support any oversight, any audit, any review. The CBP will fully support.
Well, given that, just to close, given that officers are now working with dramatically increased number of people in vulnerable populations, what type of training have CBP officers had, and have they had increased training?
So every officer, every agent gets basic training in the academy, TVPRA and PREA and training like that that goes forward. So
We've heard it's 1 hour of a video. Is that true?
That I don't know. I don't have that level of detail of how long the training is, but they do receive specific training. But I think this goes to a point. That's another reason why it was mentioned earlier, why we're asking for the 300 processing coordinators. Because they're going to take over the large portion of that role, and the design is at their academy training, they're going to get additional training specifically to the care of children and families.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member. Commissioner Morgan, thank you for being with us this morning, and I want to thank you for your leadership as well as for the hard work of the men and women that work with CBP. So. Appreciate being a partner with you. You brought up, and several people have brought up, border technology as being an integral part of the defenses that we have. So, my state of Washington, my district, I have about 100 miles of border with Canada. So certainly it's something that we have seen in, even though the focus a lot of the time is on the southern border, we see a tremendous increase in the amount of, for instance, illicit drug traffic, not only coming in from the northern border, but also through the maritime areas. I've been very happy to see the administration continuing to deploy, and you've mentioned this, the AST, the cost-effective system of the autonomous surveillance towers. I think that's exactly the direction we need to go, and I appreciate that the speed that has gone from a pilot to actually the process that we use. Simple technology in some respects, and something that's off the shelf and cost-effective. So one of my questions is, given the success of that system, could you tell us your deployment plans and how we could move faster and how much it would cost to do so? And on top of that, too, though, I also, being a northern state, also interested in if you could give us information on how that kind of technology how it will be used on the northern borders, as well as, many people have been asking about our waterways, the maritime security issues, and how it could be utilized there as well.
So I completely agree, and so I think in my opening statement, I thought it was important to include in my opening statement that it's not just about the southwest border, right? It's not just about illegal immigration. It's about a wide swath and depth and complexity of issues to include the northern border. There are absolute threats on the northern border. Drugs are clearly one of those. So when we talk about what we're doing, there's a list of things besides just the technology, which I'll address in a second. But again, go back to the CBPOs. Our design is to put CBPOs on the northern border as well as we increase those numbers. The towers and technology, again, with the FY19 funding that was provided by this committee, again, greatly appreciated. I know we're going to work through the FY20 enacted and how much money is going to go to the towers. We're hoping to get money for 200 towers, of which some towers are going to be deployed to the northern border as well. And so that's part of our overall plan. Our priority, obviously, is the southwest border, but the northern border is a part of that. In addition to that, we've just last July, we published the Northern Border Security Strategic Plan. That's an integral part of that, which includes not just land, but sea issues as well. And the last thing is we're putting a considerable amount of money into the infrastructure, into facilities on the northern border as well. Unfortunately, not Washington. There's a couple facilities in New York, but still on the northern border.
Yeah. Well, just to reemphasize that we are having issues there too, certainly not to the extent on the southern border, but my visits to the border, it's been explained to me that we're shorthanded there as well and equally as vulnerable. And so just want to make sure that we have emphasis in those areas. And yeah, but I appreciate your input here today. And like I said, look forward to continuing to be a partner with you. Appreciate that. I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
You can say that again, Madam Chair. Thank you. Acting Commissioner, it's nice to have you with us. I want to stipulate from the outset that I assume that you don't agree with the federal judge that just enjoined CBP last week from holding adults and children in unconstitutional conditions. So if you could answer the question I'm going to ask you specifically, and we can just agree that you think that they're wrong, so we can get the answer to the question. The lawsuit arose from conditions in the Tucson sector, and that revealed that the CBP frequently detained migrants for more than 48 hours without beds, showers, or adequate food, water, or medical assessments. That's unacceptable when migrants and detainees have been subject to substandard and inhumane conditions in CBP detention centers. We do have to remember that people who are detained are just that, people like you and I and all of us. The difference is by the whims of fate, they were born into more unfortunate circumstances than those of us who have the privilege of living in the United States. So my question is are you currently aware of other CBP detention facilities that mirror the conditions in the facility that was declared unconstitutional? And given the outcome of this lawsuit, will you commit to re-examining conditions of all CBP detention centers and the treatment of detainees? And how do you intend to ensure full compliance with the terms of this injunction, and how will it affect operations and treatments of migrants in other sectors?
So, first of all, I think it's very important. I appreciate you up front, because you're right, we're not always in agreement and everything, but that...
I'm not saying I don't agree with the decision. I'm saying I'm sure you don't.
Correct. But, ma'am, I appreciate you fronting that but that really is irrelevant with respect to the issue, because here is the commitment, and the answer is an easy of course. We will continue to work with this committee, every committee member, every staff here to collectively talk, have meaningful discussions on where we think and how we can improve conditions.
Okay.
I think
but you have had such a grave situation in the Tucson sector that a federal judge enjoined you from those conditions, and those conditions included leaving people for more than 48 hours without beds, showers, adequate food, water, or medical assessments. Are there other facilities in which those conditions are the same, and are you immediately going to address ensuring that those conditions don't exist in any CBP detention center?
So there's two things. So yes, we obviously have to abide by the court order, and we are taking steps to do that. But I go back to that. I respectfully disagree with the court's decision that these are unconstitutional and grave conditions.
So leaving people, you think it's okay to leave people without food, water, medical assessment, beds, showers, for 48 hours?
I think that it depends on the circumstances, the totality of the circumstances. And it depends on the capacity that we have. But we are making efforts to improve that across the board.
I'm sorry. I don't think that anyone in a position of authority like yours, like ours, should think that leaving people for more than 48 hours without beds, showers, adequate food, water, or medical assessments is acceptable in any circumstance. And what I also want to know is, are you equipped to house migrants, including children, in the first place if you can't even offer adequate food, water, beds, showers, or medical assistance?
Okay, again, with all due respect, we can go back and forth. I take exception.
You're saying, what you're saying, you've just said that you think in certain circumstances that those conditions are not unconstitutional. So
that's
is that what you're saying?
That's it. What I'm saying,
Okay.
and I can give you an example though. A single adult that comes into our custody, right? A single adult male, a Mexican national that comes into our custody. I don't think it is to say that it is unconstitutional that we don't give them a bed to sleep in.
No. It's not just a bed, a shower, adequate food, water, or medical assessments. Those were all conditions that existed in that facility, and a federal judge enjoined you from continuing those conditions, and therefore, that situation needs to be corrected in all your facilities.
And I would say we have.
Excuse me, reclaiming my time. Are you equipped to house migrants, no matter who they are, but including children, in the first place, if you can't even offer adequate food, water, beds, showers, or medical assessments?
And we are offering
Are you just
adequate
refusing
food.
to order those things?
We are providing adequate food, shelter, and medical care.
But you believe in certain circumstances that you don't have to?
No, that's not what I said. Two separate things.
Or you believe in certain circumstances that it's not
Sleeping conditions are separate from food, water, and medical care. We have been providing adequate food, water, and medical care.
Okay, but the injunction covers all of those conditions. You didn't just
that's
get
correct.
enjoined on those conditions based on not providing someone with a bed.
That's correct, and that's why we're going to appeal some of the decisions.
And
other parts
you're
of that
going
we
to
agree.
make sure that those conditions don't exist in any other facility, or you're just going to fight to maintain conditions like those that have been enjoined?
We're not going to fight to keep any unconstitutional conditions. That's not what we're going to fight. But there is a fundamental disagreement on what those unconstitutional grave conditions are, and that's
so which condition do you think is unconstitutional and which one isn't? Do you think all of the conditions that all of those categories are okay? That you can just deprive a single male adult of a shower of a medical
I just said that. No, I just said that a second ago, ma'am.
Which thing is
like
okay to
food,
deprive?
Of course, we need to provide adequate food. We need to provide adequate water. We need to provide adequate medical attention. I think we are doing all of those things.
Okay, a judge disagreed. Thank you. I yield back.
At that time.
Mr. Morgan, we understand recommendations regarding meaningful access to legal counsel. We understand recommendations regarding meaningful access to legal counsel for migrants placed in MPP were made following a red team review of this fall. What has CBP done specifically in response to the red team recommendations to address access to counsel?
Some of the things, ma'am, we were already developing, but through the red team and quite frankly, engagements with this committee, engagements with staff members of this committee, engagements with NGOs. So it's not just the red team, but specifically the red team. Some of those recommendations are, for example, to provide counsel not just prior to the hearing, but after the hearing, providing additional information such as Know Your Rights videos. We're actually expanded those to provide them in more than one time during the process going forward. And so there are also we've expanded in interpretive services as well across the board. So there are specific concrete actions that we have taken to improve access.
Well, let me just point out one thing before I ask the question. In the Know Your Rights videos, my staff actually observed last week how the noisiness in the interim hearing facilities makes it almost impossible for migrants to hear or to understand what is being said. And I believe the chair of the full committee was also on that trip. So it seems like a situation where additional effort could go a long way to mitigating the impact of the MPP program on migrants, due process. So, such as a person who know your rights presentation instead of a video. So I hope that we can work to address that particular issue, but also something that we've talked about this before and I still don't understand. Why can't CBP provide access to pro bono, and I'm emphasizing the pro bono part, why can't they provide access to pro bono counsel for those migrants at the interim MPP hearing facilities?
So they provide the list of attorneys that are available, of which a good portion of those are pro bono services. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Those who are not yet I'm talking about those who are not represented, but my understanding is that, there's a list, but then they call, there's no answer. They don't, the person at the other end, even if they get the message, they don't know where to return the call to. And so my question is, why can't there be a pro bono counsel there so that a person can actually go to them and ask for their help? Like if something is done in person, a presentation of Know Your Rights is done in person, and there are legal pro bono counsel there, then that migrant has the option of going and talking to them. My understanding is also that if there is an attorney talking to a migrant who has representation, that if someone else is in that room, another migrant, and would like to also speak to that person, that they're prohibited from doing so. So my question is, I'm just trying to understand, why can't there be access to pro bono counsel at the offset, talking about what their rights are, and then being available for anyone who wants to take advantage of it?
I guess I'm not fully understanding. I mean, are you suggesting that we just have a building where just attorneys are just sitting there, and then as a migrant comes, then they just walk?
Well, for example, when you're having the video of Know Your Rights, at that point, you could have a person, a pro bono attorney, talking about those rights and having other pro bono attorneys present. So after following that presentation, if a migrant wants to take advantage of that, they have access, rather than a list of attorneys where most of the time they don't get to talk to anybody, and that's what we've been told.
I think, with all due respect, I think what you're talking about would be just a logistical almost impossibility. And then I think it also goes into some ethical issues on, how do we, attorneys, almost like ambulance chaser issues
No, we're
that
talking,
we would
I
have to.
No, I understand the concern
So-
there. We're talking about pro bono. We're not talking
Right.
about an attorney that's trying to get business. We're talking about pro bono. And it doesn't, I don't know what the problem would be to have them do a presentation at these different locations. And there are a lot of attorneys, a lot of nonprofits who said they would be willing to participate and to do this, but that they are constantly denied access. So maybe, I can see my time is,
right.
let's talk a little bit more about
Sure.
that, because maybe there is a way that we can address this in a way that would be beneficial to the migrant, but also address any concerns that you might have.
Yes, ma'am, and hopefully we've shown that we're open to the continued dialogue, and hopefully we've shown that we have made changes to improve the access, so absolutely committed to continue that dialogue.
Okay, we will. Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I want to thank the Commissioner for his thoughtful and thorough answers. This is a process. The country is going through some very unprecedented situations and has gone through that. So I am very not only empathetic but sympathetic, but laudatory of your efforts to address these situations, and I thank you. This leads me to my next question. Last year, we saw a significant surge in the number of migrants trying to enter the country illegally. And this year's budget request reflects that need for additional support along our border for 750 new Border Patrol agents and an additional 126 new mission support personnel. Unfortunately, Border Patrol has faced a number of challenges in hiring in recent years, even to cover attrition. What changes have you made to the hiring process to achieve onboarding 750 new agents this year?
So I appreciate that question. So actually, it's something that the team has been working on for quite some time. If you look back the last 2 years, for the first time in a long time, our hiring has outpaced the attrition. And so I think that shows a tremendous progress that they've made on the overall processes. Some of it has been on the IT, on the technological side, to improve our data collection and our analysis of where we should go and how we should do that and where we should target. It's really made a significant difference. So we're very confident that we'll be able to continue that progress and be able to hire those additional agents.
Thank you, sir. Recent audit reports indicate that neither FLETC nor CBP have the capacity to train and onboard such a large number of agents in 1 year. Have you attempted to resolve these issues, sir?
We have. We've increased our academy capacity, but we're already booked up through FY20, and all our academies are at capacity already. So we're looking for additional opportunities to build out that capacity. But that's definitely a challenge.
Yes, sir. I too share Ranking Member Granger's enthusiasm for the new processing coordinator positions we funded last year. How is that hiring effort progressing this year, and are you optimistic that you can add another 300 processing coordinator positions in fiscal 21?
We are. So far, the applications for those processing agents are astronomical. I don't have the exact number of applicants, but it's far exceeded what we anticipated. And again, we feel confident that we're going to be able to fill those positions going forward.
Yes, sir. Your agency has found that most hard drugs and similar contraband smuggled into the United States come through our ports of entry. Congress has invested heavily in non-intrusive inspections technology, and I appreciate the department is working to deploy these resources at critical ports of entry. I've become aware of a new passive cargo inspection technology relying on naturally occurring particles first developed at Los Alamos National Laboratory. From my understanding, CBP's pilot showed this system is safe, effective, efficient, durable, and successfully detected illicit drugs that were shielded in routine goods that are moved legally across the border as part of routine commerce. According to CBP's own report, this new and emerging technology can immediately offer a sought-after and much-needed scanning solution when deployed to secondary scanning locations. What is the department's plan to deploy this and other NII technologies at key points of entry, sir?
So again, I appreciate that question. NII, it's a game changer. And you know, in 2019, this committee, again, thank you, $560 million, 20 another $60 million. For NII technology. It really is a game changer across. And I think it's important on the NII technology, and I think what you just represented is this isn't an off-the-shelf type stuff. It's ever changing, ever evolving. We're actually working with companies, investors, to actually develop new technology like you just described that enhance our capabilities. So it's not just about, in this arena, it's not just about acquiring technology, it's about acquiring the right technology that's not just going to be effective today, but it's going to be effective in years from now. I'll give you a quick example. Really what we want to do is provide NII also at pre-primary. We want to be able to do it so people don't have to get out of their vehicles. But just a few years ago, that technology was large and cumbersome, and it wouldn't fit in pre-primary. We went to investors, we went to companies, they've shrunk that technology, they've been able to do it where people can actually stay in their vehicles, and we can put it in pre-primary, increasing throughput, unbelievable. So we're looking at our LSS, they're looking at every aspect of NII and how we can improve the technology and get the right technology.
Thank you, sir. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mr. Morgan, thank you so much for being here. And I appreciate the work that you do and your men and women, the work that they do. You know, one of the biggest issues that we need to address on the border has to do with guns going south. As you know, after the trade agreement for Mexico, that was their number one priority. Their second priority is how do we stop guns? The technology that I heard you say, I mean, going north from Mexico in, you know, we got very good technology, we got personnel, we got canines, but if we can do something, and I know y'all have been meeting with the Mexicans, and I know I've seen some of your folks also do more of that work, but if you have any whole government approach that we can work on, let me know. I know we had Chairwoman Nita Lowey down there, and the Mexicans also told her the same thing. Cabeza de Vaca, the Mexican ambassador, said, this is a problem. So somehow we got to work with ATF, DEA, the Mexican side, because we got to stop this guns from sound. So if y'all can come up with a plan, we'll be happy to work with the committee, and if we can get the support to, you know, get you maybe canines or technology, personnel. Even if we look at personnel like we did the Border Patrol processing, folks that we did for those where they're not the law enforcement, but they can provide assistance. You know, just think outside the box and see if we can do that, because, I mean, we know the great violence. What is it, 80% of the guns that the drug cartels use are from America, and about 40% of them come from the state of Texas. So I'm a big believer in the Second Amendment, but we got to stop this illegal guns. And I've seen them. I've been at the ATF, and I've seen the guns. They're not little guns. They're like huge guns. Weapons are being used. So your thoughts?
So I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. And so we are looking at this, one, as kind of a whole government approach. To some degree is we're not going to seize our way at the border out of this issue. Right. I think, you know, everybody knows here is hey, we can do a southbound weapons op at a certain POE. Within a couple hours, they're just shipped.
They move over.
And so it really has to be a whole government approach with the interdictors, with the investigators, the intelligence-driven approaches. So what we want to do is we want to go into the interior. We want to go into the shops and location in Texas that's actually shipping these and actually go to the head of the snake instead of just getting the weapons. But make no mistake, weapons are a currency to the cartels. It's a huge problem. We are working with the government of Mexico. The Attorney General has actually also gone there too and developing a plan as well that is that whole government approach with interdictors and investigators. We're working with the government of Mexico now together collectively. We've identified certain strategic locations we want to do these operations. You know, yes, for one thing that could support, and it'll be interesting to have these ongoing discussions about intelligence analysts, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that we always need gun toters, but to get more intelligence analysts to focus specifically on intelligence-driven operations, focus on southbound operations would be a key part of this. Also continue to put pressure on Mexico to continue their use of E-Trace. Yes. It's hopefully lacking in the government of Mexico. And you're also right. It's not just small weapons are going there. It's pieces and parts, and they actually have gunsmiths in Mexico. They're getting these pieces and parts and actually building large weapons. It's a problem.
Exactly. Well, we appreciate it if you can put something together and make it a whole, because we don't want to just talk about Department of Homeland, but we got ATF, I mean, Department of Justice, and our friends across. They need.
And I couldn't agree more. We are working with ATF. We're working with DEA. I just think we need to come together, as you said, that whole government approach together, and really look at this from an intelligence-driven set of operations. So.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Get us a plan, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. The chairwoman mentioned that many of the transnational criminal organizations are going to be increasing and moving more of their operations to our oceans, to our coastlines. And, you know, I will never miss the opportunity to kind of talk up our Coast Guard, who has an awesome national security mission, as so does your agency, falling under the Homeland Security umbrella. Can you speak about your observation and your inner cooperation with the Coast Guard? And it might also be a good time to actually just throw out the Joint Interagency Task Force South, that's Jayada South, that's in Key West, because that's a perfect example of multiple agencies coming together with multiple nations working together to eradicate the drug smuggling, because those nations that are south of the American border know how disruptive and damaging this smuggling operation is to not just their country, but to the region. So I give you an opportunity to speak to that.
So one, I completely agree with you 100% on the maritime issues. And I think yesterday was talked a little bit about, and some, depth and defense, I think is correct. We want to stop the drugs before they get to our border. Coast Guard is tremendous in that effort. And I'm proud to say that our AMO operation provide more flight hours in support of the Coast Guard operations than any other agency. I think in the last 10 years, it's somewhere around 63,000 flight hours that we provided the Coast Guard. Last year alone, on our side, 300,000 pounds of narcotics were recovered with respect to AMO support, for example, to the Coast Guard and some other partners. GIAF South is the model. We use that in other regions as well. And so that's why there's a robust amount of funding requests in the 21 budget to upgrade our surveillance equipment and upgrade the outdated systems. And a lot of that specifically is going to go to support the Coast Guard and maritime operations.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of having a classified briefing by JF South last week, and two chairs away from me was a CBP officer, one of your guys, and you can tell they work closely because the mission that they have is extremely important. And the Coast Guard would probably also tell you, and you may as well, is that the National Security Cutter has been a game changer in this. They're able to go down there, and sometimes the only U.S. form of naval presence we have in South and Central America is the United States Coast Guard. And they're able to stay on position longer and interdict more illicit drugs coming to our nation.
And what I would say is again, one of the reasons why GIAF South is so effective, so productive, though, it really is a whole of government approach. So it's not just the Coast Guard cutters, but it's the CBP aircraft, the P3s and the other aircraft that's there. AMO is using the same concept, working with other host countries as well, Mexico and countries of Central America and the maritime operations as well, to help them providing that capability so they can also interdict in the sea as well. It's so we're very proud of what AMO is doing.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate everything that your agency's doing. And just one last remark, over the past 4 years, 2 million pounds of cocaine has been seized by the United States Coast Guard. That's a street value of $26 billion. And those NSCs that are partaking in this are a lot cheaper than that. I think they pay for themselves. That's why I think we need more NSCs, not less. But we also need the Polar Security Cutter and the Offshore Patrol Cutter. We need all the above approach to fighting this. And airplanes and a lot of things the CBP needs as well. So thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Mr. Aguilar.
And I'm going to come back to that, building off of what Mr. Palazzo said in just a minute. Remain in Mexico, Mr. Commissioner, during a press conference in November, you shared that in September 2019, there were 42,000 individuals that had sent back to Mexico as part of Remain in Mexico. You gave a larger number, I think, in your testimony. What was that number? 59,000. And I appreciate your willingness. You mentioned, and I just wrote down, get us all the numbers in quotes in response to the chairwoman's comments. How many of these individuals are children out of the 59,000?
I don't have that data in front of me, but we can get that data. We do collect that data. We can get that too.
Do we have a tracking system that says what happens to individuals when they're returned back to Mexico?
So that's a complicated process. I'd be more than happy offline to get some more detail on that. But multiple things can happen when they are returned to MPP. Right now, we have a 50% no-show rate. We have individuals that just voluntarily return to their country of origin. We have individuals that just drop out of the program and remain in Mexico. We don't have the ability to collect that data.
Do we acknowledge that individuals are approaching CBP officers and saying that they've been assaulted or attacked? What happens if someone does say that to a CBP?
So I appreciate the questions. A great question. So, because sometimes I think there's a misunderstanding. At any time in the process, as someone that's enrolled in MPP, anytime they can claim fear at any time. It doesn't matter how long they've been in MPP. It doesn't matter how many times they're brought back for proceedings. They can go to the POE and claim fear at any single time, and that process will be administered, and that due process the same as it would be any other time.
Fear being assault, kidnapping, police officers?
Whatever the migrant brings forward, if they're claiming fear, then that will be adjudicated. Absolutely.
I would take issue with that. I'm not certain that that lines up with the data and the information that we're hearing, but that's fine. I don't think we're going to agree on that today. You mentioned numbers for NII, and this is what I wanted to build off of. 264 million. You mentioned in FY19, 59 million in FY20, and this is in addition to the 182 in FY18. Of the 705 million provided by this committee over the last 3 years, how much has been spent?
I don't have that exact number of how much has been spent. I can get that to you. But again, it goes back to the question earlier is that we're trying to be thoughtful and methodical and not just buying just technology to spend the money, but making sure that we're getting the right technology. And again, we're working with companies, we're working with manufacturers to provide the right kind of technology we need, and it's working. I believe we've allocated the most of the 18 money, and we'll probably go through 20 to FY21 on final execution of the 19 funding.
So you're saying roughly 180 million, the FY18 money has been allocated, and you think the FY19 and 20 money can be allocated within this fiscal year?
No, not within this fiscal year. We'll probably still.
What's fair to say within the fiscal year?
Probably by 2021, we'll still have around 200 million that we still need to execute on the NII. It's multiple year money, but I can get you the exact the numbers on that.
We have a plan to execute this. Do we have
Yes.
Do we have a plan to get to 100%? Do we have a plan to get to 80% inspections on cargoes, as Mr. Rutherford mentioned, or
Yes.
on trucks? Or
Yes, we do. So with the funding right now that we have, we're pretty confident. So in vehicles, for example, we're about 2%. We think that once
you said 2% for cargo as well.
3% for cargo.
3% for cargo, 2% for passenger, 16% for commercial.
That's exactly right. You got trucks. So what we think, again, appreciate all the money for the NII this committee has supported. For example, so the cars, we're expecting to go from 2% to 40%. On the trucks, we're expecting to go from that 16% to 72%. So we do think that this investment is going to pay off substantially and increase our capacity.
I think we're going to need to see some plans on how you get there faster, and how you get beyond the 60%, beyond 70%. I think that's what this committee would like to see. But building off of what we've heard from my colleagues, and I just want to make sure that you're hearing the same thing. I heard Mr. Newhouse, Mr. Palazzo, the chairwoman, Mr. Rutherford, Mr. Rupersberger, and Ranking Member Fleischman all mention NII all mention other ways to interdict drugs, not NII, other ways to interdict drugs, whether it be NII or whether it be Coast Guard investments or whether it be new technologies at the ports of entry. It's our responsibility to prioritize the maritime Coast Guard assets and investments, technology and drones, port technologies, screening of containers and trucks, because that's where we're actually interdicting the most drugs, as Mr. Palazzo said. Backpacks full of drugs aren't getting us there. We've got to take these larger swaths and make these bigger investments, most of that illegal activity and most of that tonnage. So when we don't prioritize a border wall that I would say is a vanity project and a campaign promise, it isn't because we aren't focused on protecting our country. It's because there are finite resources, and we think some of these other ways are better investments for our dollars. And the Constitution empowers us to make that decision and to make that determination. So I know you want fee increases. I know you want changes. You want more money for different things. That happens when you have trust. You get that flexibility when we trust that you're allocating the dollars effectively, and when you're listening to the appropriators on how we should spend this. So I would just encourage you to think that through. All of these things are important, but we can't get there if we don't trust your numbers, if we don't trust the Jihada South. I've been there too. I've taken that classified briefing. You know what else they like? They like the counter drug money that they receive from these interagency task forces. That was stolen for the border wall. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Returning to the border wall issue, Mr. Morgan, the Border Patrol is overseeing an ongoing scheme to blow up mountains and ancient saguaro in the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument. As you very well know, this land has been lived on by the Tohono O'odham since before recorded history. They have sacred burial sites in the region. So I'd just like to know what gives us the right to blow up their lands that are so rich in indigenous cultural resources. And moreover, building more wall in this protected national monument will isolate and reduce rare wildlife species like the jaguar and destroy vital pristine wilderness. It will also worsen flooding when rivers overflow, and some of the cactuses that were destroyed here were around before the border even existed. So I'd like to ask you to explain why the Tohono O'odham Nation was not properly consulted before you decided to blow up their sacred lands. They've expressed their total opposition to what you are doing at Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which is a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve.
So first of all, I would respectfully object to the categorize as we're blowing anything up. I don't, from my position, ma'am, I don't believe that is what I consider that we're doing. Second,
you're not doing blasting in mountains or destroying Saguaro?
I think that we are constructing a border wall system that is desperately needed as part of a multi-layer strategy for our national security.
Okay.
I do not believe what we're doing is blowing up.
Excuse me, reclaiming my time. I'm asking you. No, you're not.
Ma'am.
You're trying to defend the border wall, and I'm asking you.
I will defend the border wall.
But that's not what I'm asking you to do. You're here to answer our questions.
And I'm trying to.
No, you're not. So what you're trying to do is defend the border wall, and I am trying. There's a process that you go through in order to be able to construct a wall. And in that process, you are destroying mountains through explosives, and you are also destroying saguaro that are ancient and sacred. So please explain to me why the Tohono O'odham were not properly consulted before you decided to blow up, eliminate, destroy, whatever term you want to use, they're gone, their sacred lands.
So, but I do think words matter. So that's why
I want you to
I
answer
take
my
exception
question,
to blow
please.
up. I'm trying, ma'am. So what I would say is that from our perspective, we have consulted with the nation.
In what way?
We have again, we've followed procedure and we've followed law. I'd be more than happy to provide you and this committee and the staffers exactly all the meetings we've had.
Okay.
We document those meetings, and I'd be more than happy to provide all that.
Let's explore that here further before I just wait for your documents that usually don't come. Because DHS has said that you'll have a, quote, environmental monitor present. So does that mean you'll have someone there to watch the environment get blown up? Are you doing anything else to mitigate what is a travesty of environmental justice? The reference you're making to supposedly following the laws here is that you've abused the Real ID Act by flippantly waiving environmental laws in its name, like the Endangered Species Act and tribal sovereignty statutes. Of the 21 times that the Real ID Act has been invoked to waive federal laws since it was enacted, 16 of those waivers have been invoked by the Trump administration. And you claim that you've respected tribal sovereignty, as you've just done here, but bones have already been found by border wall construction crews. And your administration's own National Park Service concluded in September of last year that significant cultural resources, quote, will be destroyed over the course of ensuing border wall construction. This land was protected for a reason. So I'd like to, go beyond your words and ask you how it is you think you've actually consulted the Tohono O'odham before you have enacted these waivers, because talk is cheap. I'm sure you wouldn't like it if the federal government blew up your great-grandmother's grave, which is essentially what you've been doing here.
I disagree with that. We have not been blowing up graves.
Okay,
I just disagree with that.
You've been blowing up sacred lands, and they've strenuously objected.
And again, this goes back to...
How have you complied with the consultation requirements that you have with the tribal government of the Tohono O'odham?
Again, there are consultation requirements and there are processes, and we've followed those processes.
What specifically have you done?
We can't just go on a land. There is a process. We have to go there.
I'm asking you specifically what you've done.
And I'm trying to answer the question.
You're just telling me that you've consulted. How?
Right.
In what way?
So we've had meetings. We go into to these individuals just like we would any landowner, right? And we first start off with asking for voluntary permission to go to the land, right? And we talk to that. We tell them and we show them what we want to do, how we want to do it, where we want to do it. There have been times where we come across issues and we go and we consult with them, and we have, and I can provide you that documentation.
Have you given them any cooperation or mitigation, or have you just spoken words to them and then done what you wanted anyway, waived the Real ID Act, and
we are
proceeded.
working with them.
Okay,
we
well,
are working
they
with them.
strenuously disagree that you are working with them, so my strong suggestion is that you communicate with them so that you are maybe more on the same page, because right now you're just blowing up their sacred lands.
I'm committed 100% to continue to work with them.
Well, they disagree, and so
we'll follow up.
actions speak louder than words. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Morgan, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for working with us on the Humanitarian Care Center for the Rio Grande Valley, the $40 million. We appreciate that. You understand why it's so important to do that. So thank you for doing that. And also thank you for the request also for the $27.4 million for the construction of the air marinas. You know exactly what's happening there in Laredo, so
significant.
Appreciate that. I just have to ask you, of course, about the wall real quickly. All I ask you is to make sure you look at the language that the Appropriations Committee had about taking in consideration community and environmental concerns at the border. Appreciate what you're doing, working with the bulkhead in Laredo. I want to say thank you because you all have been outstanding on that part. I appreciate it. The other ones around my area is San Ignacio. You know, San Ignacio is the oldest town in Zapata, and they have a U.S. National Register of Historic. It's part of the U.S. Register of Historic Places, U.S. National Historic Landmark, recorded Texas Historic Landmark also. At the Laredo College, I think today there's a board meeting where the Army Corps is going to ask, of course, the request for access, and I think your folks have sent that also. And there is a historic Fort McIntosh there that was established many years to protect the area there. So, again, I know you all have something there about historic places. I would ask you to just be very sensitive to those areas. As you know, in the past, we've added language. The committee has added language to protect the chapel, the Butterfly Center, and a couple other places. So in San Ignacio in the Laredo area, I ask you to take a look at that also. Just take the community folks in consideration.
Yes, sir. And hopefully on the bulkhead, hopefully that illustrates an example. You and I had personally had conversations of our commitment to doing just that, to coordinating and trying to come up with meaningful, reasonable compromises, and committed to doing that.
Yeah, appreciate it. We spoke to Governor Cabeza de Vaca, the governor from Tamaulipas. He's willing to do the same thing, so it'll be an international river walk like they have in San Antonio if it gets to that point on that. Thank you so much. Thank you, and to your men and women also.
Before we end the hearing, I want to strongly emphasize the importance of an open and transparent relationship between this subcommittee and each component within the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Commissioner, you made a commitment to provide information to the committee on the following issues, many of which this committee has been requesting repeatedly for months. And I'm just going to outline them. I know you have staff here, so take quick notes. First, detailed descriptions for each of the new pathways for removal programs. Second, the number of migrants in each program, a requirement that we also included in the 2020 appropriation that has not yet been filled. And third, the information that Mr. Price requested on metering, and I note that our FY 2020 bill also had a requirement for a report on metering that has not been provided to date. This information really does impact how we make resource allocations decisions. So we look forward to getting meaningful, accurate, and complete information from you. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on some of the issues that I still believe that basically there are areas of disagreement, but our main objective of protecting our country, there's no difference in that, nor is there any difference in terms of the willingness of this subcommittee, including myself, to do everything we can to make sure you have the resources to do what needs to be done to fulfill your mission. So I thank you for being here and look forward to working with you.
Yes, ma'am. And if you don't mind, I would like to comment on the open and transparent. I completely agree. And I think that's one thing that CBP, I'll speak for CBP, that we need to get better at. We need to get better at being more responsive, timely, and making sure that we're giving you the information you need in your requests. we need to get better in that. And I promise you, I'm committed to doing that for all those reasons.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Hearing's adjourned.
Good job. Thank you. Good job, sir.
Mark.
Pleasure to be with you, sir. Great job.
Mark.
Thank you.
If we could just hold concert views, like bed access to housing, that would be tremendous help in building trust. I'm not just talking about our Democratic caucus, but I'm talking